Hello everyone, this is Sonia here with the Sci-fi Adventures Channel, and I am back with the continuation of Chapter 10 of my time track story, The Mysterious Appearance of Dr. Frederick Eisenhart, and this is part 2. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll just get right into the story. Sophia was a bit dazed as she woke with a start and found herself still seated on the train. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized that she had passed out yet again. Peering outside one of the train's windows, she could see that it was still dark outside and consoled herself that not much time could have passed since she had fainted. Taking a deep breath, it dawned on her, like someone turning on a light switch, that her memory had finally returned. A surge of emotion swept over her as she reflected on her memories, treasuring each one now as if it were a rare jewel. She especially treasured the memories of her time with T.C., and she shuddered to think that she could have ever forgotten him. As she glanced around the interior of the passenger car, she finally noticed that there seemed to be no sign of either Daniel or Spencer now on the train. She would have been more panicked at this realization if she had not spotted their new friend, the scientist Dr. Frederick Eisenhart, sitting 2 rows ahead and nervously turning the pages of a large newspaper. Not wanting to startle him, Sophia made an effort to speak calmly. "Excuse me, Dr. Eisenhart, do you happen to know where Daniel and Spencer might be?" At the sound of her voice, the scientist quickly tossed his newspaper aside and hurried over to her. "Oh, thank heavens you are all right. You gave us a dreadful scare, dreadful indeed." As he peered intently at her, Sophia was surprised to see genuine relief in his intelligent brown eyes. "I'm truly sorry to have worried everyone, but I assure you I feel just fine now, and I have my memory back." A puzzled expression came over the scientist's face when she mentioned her memory, and Sophia went on to explain. "That horrible time bandit drugged me with something that made me lose my memory." The scientist suddenly went very pale and looked distressed. "Oh, that must have been so terrible for you, and it is all my fault." Such a look of melancholy fell over his now pale features that Sophia could hardly bear it. "Oh no, please, you just can't keep blaming yourself for an honest mistake. You meant no harm, and we all make mistakes from time to time." The scientist still looked a bit melancholy, but he nodded in agreement. "That is true indeed. The real challenge, I suppose, is in being able to forgive oneself." Sophia gave him an encouraging smile before steering the conversation back to Spencer and Daniel's whereabouts. "Please, do you happen to know where Daniel and Spencer went?" The scientist nodded solemnly. "Oh, yes, you see, we were all really quite distraught when you fainted, and it was so very stressful because the train had started moving. And in spite of our best efforts, and we even tried my smelling salts, mind you, we simply could not revive you. Finally, one of the young men, I think it was the one called Spencer, suggested I stay here with you while they went to fetch the time conductor in the hopes that he might know what to do." Sophia's eyes widened in alarm. "Oh no, but that does not sound safe at all for them. Aren't we at the Time Bandit's time portal now, or at least very close to it?" The scientist gave her another solemn nod. "Yes, I do believe we are quite close, although I've not ventured out. I gave my word that I would not leave the train until they returned." Sophia's pulse quickened at the thought of Daniel and Spencer going anywhere near the Time Bandit or his time portal. I do appreciate you staying here with me. Thank you very much for that. I just hope they were able to get to TC safely, and I wish we knew how close we really are to the time portal." The scientist made an attempt to reassure her. "I think they will be fine. Those two young men strike me as quite strong and capable." Sophia managed a shaky smile and fervently hoped he was right. There seemed to be no choice, at least for the time being, but to wait and trust that Daniel and Spencer had been able to safely get to TC and that they would all be back shortly. Not wanting to be alone with her anxious thoughts, Sophia decided to ask the scientist a few questions. "So, Dr. Eisenhart." The scientist raised his hand and interrupted her. "Please feel free to call me Frederick if you would like." Sophia smiled. "Oh yes, thank you, I would like that." Frederick gave her a satisfactory nod and urged her to continue. "Well, I was wondering, since you are a scientist, if you might be willing to explain things a bit more from a scientific point of view. I'm not sure how well I understand the idea of time portals, especially." Her inquiry seemed to have pleased him as he smiled for the first time and settled back more comfortably into his seat. Yes, time portals. Let's see if I can break this down simply for you. You might have already heard that time portals are wormholes that connect one time to another. Intrigued and confused all at once, Sophia shook her head. "I'm not sure I've heard it. I have heard that before. How is such a thing possible?" Frederick gestured to the interior of the train. "Take, for example, this very train. If we think of it as a means to move fast enough to rupture the space-time continuum, it can create a stable wormhole. Then it is simply a matter of entering the space-time highway, so to speak." Sophia shook her head in amazement. "It does not sound simple to me at all, but I do find it so very interesting. I am also curious about the Time Bandits' illegal time portal. Is that definitely what caused the breaches in our timeline?" The scientist winced in pain at the mention of the breaches, and Sophia immediately regretted her question. "Oh, please, if you would rather not answer." Frederick shook his head emphatically and squared his shoulders. "No, I must get used to this, although I cannot deny that it is difficult. In answer to your question, the Time Bandit's use of his illegal time portal has surely been the cause of the rifts in our timeline. And sadly, even when such breaches can be repaired, things still cannot entirely go back to the way they once were. It is a matter then of going forward, you see, with a new timeline as best we can." Sophia drew in a sharp breath. She had wondered what repairing their timeline might really mean for them, and now she knew. Even if she, Daniel, and Spencer were successful in repairing their timeline, some things would apparently still be altered forever. As Sophia continued to ponder what this new and different timeline might look like, a chill went through her. What if the new timeline would have to somehow still include the Time Bandit in it? The idea was so terribly upsetting that she had to ask her new friend about it. She was a bit hesitant now to bring it up because she did not want to upset him again. However, the matter weighed so heavily upon her that she just had to ask. "Please, Frederick, I hope you won't mind if I ask you just one more question." Sophia could not read his expression as he nodded in the affirmative. "Yes, of course." Sophia cleared her throat, suddenly a bit anxious herself about the whole subject. "Do you know where this Time Bandit originally came from?" The scientist removed his spectacles for a moment, and Sophia noticed a new faraway look in his eyes. "You ask a very interesting question indeed. It will take a little explaining if you're up to it." Sophia nodded eagerly. "Yes, please. I want to know where he came from and if repairing our timeline would guarantee keeping him away in the future." Frederick put his spectacles back on and regarded her soberly. "There are not only multiple timelines, but multiple universes, too." Sophia gasped out loud. "There are other universes?" The scientist nodded. "Indeed, there are as many timelines and universes as there are infinite possibilities. And it turns out that this time bandit, as you call him, is a notoriously well-known rebel in many of them." Sophia could not begin to imagine how such a thing could be possible, and yet every instinct in her told her that this time bandit was not from her world or universe. "If we're able to repair our timeline, can we keep him from ever coming back again?" The scientist's brow furrowed in concentration. "I do think it is possible if certain precautions are taken." Much relieved to hear it, Sophia felt a little lighter of heart as her new friend continued. "In fact, I have been commissioned by the time conductor to ensure that once the breaches have been repaired, no one will ever again be able to make the same terrible mistake that I did." Here his face grew a bit red, but he seemed to recover quickly. "The time conductor also brought me here for another very important reason." He paused then and picked up his brown briefcase, and Sophia watched with a puzzled expression as he set the briefcase on his lap and expertly opened the latch. As soon as it sprang open, Sophia saw that it contained all 3 rift locators. As she stared at the devices wide-eyed, she realized with a surge of excitement that TC's errand must have been about the scientist. "How did you come by all 3 of the devices?" Frederick quickly closed the briefcase before answering. "Well, TC already had one of them in his possession, and I had the other 2 hidden safely away." The scientist patted the briefcase protectively, and Sophia swallowed nervously at the awful thought of the time bandit ever getting his hands on all 3 of them. "Please, do you think they are safe all together in one place?" Frederick shook his head. "It is not ideal, I agree, but for now I think we must leave them where they are and hope for the best." Sophia nodded nervously. Suddenly she was quite agitated that Daniel and Spencer still had not returned with TC, and Frederick seemed to be getting impatient as well. And much to Sophia's surprise, especially since he had given his word to stay put on the train, he stood up with his briefcase in hand and headed for the entrance of the passenger car. "I do wonder what could be taking them all so long." Sophia caught her breath as it occurred to her that he might be considering stepping outside. "Oh, don't you think we ought to wait just a little longer? They are expecting us to wait for them here." There was a long and somewhat uncomfortable pause as Sophia waited for his answer. What happened next was not entirely clear to her. She had no idea if the scientist had actually opened the door and caused the trouble, or if the trouble had just come upon them. All she knew was that there was suddenly a loud ringing in the air, and Sophia knew with certainty, because she had heard that ringing once before, that it was the train's intruder alarm. Shaking almost uncontrollably with fear, Sophia was also certain that the intruder was the time bandit himself. Frederick, who had never heard the alarm before, shouted in pain and covered his ears. As he did so, the briefcase slipped out of his hands, and Sophia ran toward it with a sharp cry, and catching it just in time, shoved it quickly out of sight under one of the seats. Within seconds, and just as Sophia had suspected, the time bandit was inside the train with them. And that does conclude chapter 10. I hope you've been enjoying this story, and I look forward to being back with you soon with chapter 11 of Time Track. So until then, thank you again for joining me. Until next time.